High above the clouds, at 30,000 feet, the cabin hummed with quiet conversations, the soft clinking of cutlery, and the low thrum of engines carrying lives across continents. For most passengers, this was just another flight. But tonight, the air carried something different, an unease waiting to break. It began with a simple discovery. A tray, meant for a first-class passenger, had gone missing. The flight attendant, sharp-eyed and impeccably dressed, stiffened as she counted the remaining meals. Her lips pressed together, her breath quickening. First-class service was sacred, and the idea that a meal, crafted for prestige, could vanish was unacceptable. Her eyes scanned the cabin. The suited businessmen and the casually elegant travelers didn't raise suspicion. Then her gaze landed on a man who didn't quite fit. Plain clothes, quiet demeanor, a presence too unremarkable for the polished world of first class. She stepped forward, heels clicking on the carpet. "Excuse me, sir," she said firmly, her voice slicing through the calm. "It seems we're short one first-class meal. I need to ask, did you take it?" The man looked up slowly. His eyes were calm, almost tired, as if he'd heard accusations far heavier than this one in his lifetime. He said nothing at first, letting the question hang in the air like turbulence before a storm. Passengers nearby began to whisper. Did she just accuse him? He doesn't look like he belongs here anyway. Probably snuck in. The quiet cabin was no longer quiet. Judgment spread faster than smoke, and all eyes fixed on the man in the ordinary clothes. Finally he spoke. "No," he said simply. "I didn't take it." The attendant's brows arched, her suspicion deepening. "Sir, we have an exact count. One is missing. And you're the only one here who... well..." She let her eyes sweep over his plain shirt, his worn jacket. "Who doesn't exactly look like a first-class traveler?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the seats. The man didn't flinch. He folded his hands, resting them on the tray table in front of him. "Appearances can mislead," he replied softly, "and I don't take what isn't mine." His calmness only irritated her further. "Sir, if you continue to deny it, I'll have no choice but to file a report when we land. This is theft, a criminal offense." Gasps erupted. Some passengers leaned closer to watch. Others shook their heads, whispering about the audacity of a man who dared sit among them in such plain attire. The accused man sighed. His gaze drifted briefly to the window, to the endless night beyond the glass, before returning to her. "I suggest you choose your words carefully," he said, his tone even, but carrying a weight that silenced a few murmurs. For a heartbeat, the attendant hesitated. Something in his eyes unsettled her, though she quickly masked it with a professional smile. "Then I expect full cooperation, sir." But even as she spoke, the atmosphere shifted. The passengers weren't watching a petty dispute anymore. They were watching a mystery unfold. Who was this man? Why was he so calm, so unshaken, when most would panic under accusation? Whispers turned into speculation. Maybe he forged his ticket. What if he's dangerous? He must be hiding something. And in truth, he was. The missing meal was only the spark. The real story, his story, was just beginning to burn. As the attendant straightened and prepared to escalate, the man leaned back in his seat, quiet as ever, but with the faintest trace of a knowing smile. The storm at 30,000 feet had only just begun. And in the next moments, the world would learn that this was no ordinary passenger. The cabin had fallen into a tense silence, broken only by the steady hum of the engines. Every eye was on the Mai, and in plain clothes, the one who had just been accused of stealing. His calm denial still lingered in the air, but no one seemed convinced. He sat straight, hands folded neatly, gaze steady. His clothes told one story, simple, ordinary, forgettable. But his presence told another. There was something unshaken about him, something that didn't belong to the image others painted in their minds. The attendant's lips curled into a sharp smile, more performative than professional. "Sir," she said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear, "when we land, authorities will be waiting. Theft in first class is no small matter." A few passengers smirked. Others whispered with a cruel edge. "He'll be arrested right off the plane. Serves him right, thinking he could sneak into luxury. I knew he didn't belong here the moment I saw him." The man did not respond. He didn't defend himself, didn't plead, didn't even look rattled. Instead, he adjusted his seat slightly, as if ensuring he was comfortable for what was coming next. His silence unnerved her. "Do you understand the seriousness of what I'm saying?" the attendant pressed, her voice rising. "You can't just sit there quietly. Either explain yourself or prepare to face consequences." He lifted his gaze to meet hers. His voice was low, steady, unshaken. "I said I didn't take it. That's the truth. Believe it or don't. It makes no difference to me." The simplicity of his words carried more weight than the anger in hers. Something about the certainty in his tone made a few passengers hesitate, though none dared speak in his defense. Still, the stares continued, sharp, judgmental, unkind. In this world of tailored suits and designer bags, his presence was a disruption. His plain shirt, his worn jacket, his quiet confidence. They painted him as an intruder, an outsider who dared step where he did not belong. The attendant leaned closer, lowering her voice but dripping with menace. "You may think your silence protects you, but it won't. When we land, you'll answer for this. I'll make sure of it." For the first time, the Iman's lips curved into the faintest smile. Not a smile of arrogance, but of someone who knew a truth far deeper than the room around him. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply let her words hang in the air, powerless against the calm in his eyes. One passenger in the corner whispered, "Why isn't he fighting back?" Another replied, "Because he's guilty. That's why." But they were wrong. His silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Behind that plain exterior, behind the unremarkable clothes, hid a secret that none of them could imagine. He wasn't just a passenger. He wasn't just a man wrongly accused. He was something more, something far more dangerous to those who stood against him. As the plane sailed forward into the night, the tension in the cabin grew heavier, pressing on every seat like unseen weight. And still, the stranger sat in perfect composure, as though every glare, every threat, every whispered insult slid off him like rain against steel. The attendant, frustrated by his lack of fear, straightened her uniform and marched away, but her words lingered in the air like a warning. "We'll see what happens when we land." Passengers exchanged knowing glances. To them, the verdict was already sealed. They saw a thief. They saw a man who didn't belong. But the stranger's silence told another story, a story none of them were ready to hear. And soon, the world would learn exactly who this quiet man truly was. The engines roared steadily outside, but inside the cabin, the noise came from people. Quiet at first, like ripples on still water, then louder, sharper, until the whispers became a storm of judgment circling one man. "He looks nervous. Definitely guilty. Imagine stealing a meal in first class. How pathetic. I bet he slipped in with a fake ticket." Not everyone agreed. A woman across the aisle frowned. "You don't know that," she whispers it to her husband. "He didn't even raise his voice. Maybe he's telling the truth." But the husband shook his head firmly. "Men like him don't sit here. Just look at him." The stranger remained unmoved, still calm, his gaze fixed on the clouds outside, as if the voices around him didn't exist. His silence made him seem larger than he was, a figure people couldn't quite read, and that scared them more. The flight attendant, emboldened by the murmurs, approached again. This time her words cut deeper. "Sir, your refusal to cooperate is making matters worse. Do you want to be escorted off by security the moment we land? Because that's exactly where this is going." Passengers leaned closer, eager for the confrontation. He turned his head slowly, his eyes finding hers. His voice, though soft, carried through the cabin like steel sliding from its sheath. "Be careful." The words were simple, but they stopped her cold. Something in his tone, steady, measured, absolute, made her falter. For a moment her practiced authority wavered. What did you say?" she asked, her voice sharper now, covering her unease. "I said," he repeated, each syllable deliberate, "be careful with your accusations. You might not like where they lead." A chill rippled through the air. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some sneered, convinced this was a threat. Others stayed quiet, unnerved by the confidence of a man accused yet unshaken. The attendant forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. "Is that supposed to intimidate me? Sir, you're the one in trouble here, not me." But deep down she felt it. That quiet authority, the kind that didn't come from bluster or pride, but from someone who carried weight far beyond what anyone could see. The whispers grew again, but now they had shifted. "Did you hear his tone? He doesn't sound like a thief. Or maybe he's dangerous. Maybe worse than a thief." The stranger didn't feed the noise. He simply leaned back, eyes calm, hands folded once more. Silence returned to him like an old friend, wrapping around him while ever. Jonels fidgeted in unease. For the first time, doubt crept into the cabin. Not about the missing meal, that was almost forgotten now, but about the man himself. Who was he? Why did he carry himself like someone with nothing to fear? The attendant swallowed her nerves and turned away, muttering something about procedure. But her steps were less confident now, her posture less commanding. And in that uneasy silence, passengers realized something chilling. The man hadn't raised his voice once, yet somehow he controlled the room. The storm inside the cabin was far from over, because soon his real identity would begin to surface, and no one would be prepared for the truth. For the passengers, he was just a stranger in worn clothes. But the truth, his truth, was far more dangerous than anyone suspected, because that man was not who he seemed. The cabin around him blurred into whispers and stares, but in his mind, he replayed the mission that had brought him here. This flight wasn't about luxury or comfort. It was about justice. Weeks earlier, in a dimly lit office lined with files and sealed envelopes, he had been handed a case no one else dared touch. High-value goods, jewelry, rare electronics, even confidential documents were vanishing mid-flight. No forced entry, no traces, just gone. And the trail always pointed back to the skies. "Someone inside the airlines is running a smuggling ring," the intelligence officer had told him. "We don't know who. Crew, pilots, attendants, any of them could be involved. We need eyes on the inside, eyes no one would expect." That's when he volunteered, not as a uniformed official, not with flashing badges or escorts, but as something smaller, a shadow in plain clothes. A passenger no one would notice. But he wasn't just any volunteer. He was a judge. A man who had spent his life weighing truth and lies, dismantling criminal knees. It works with words sharper than any blade. His authority stretched beyond the courtroom into the hidden corners where corruption thrived. Now, here he was, on board, watching, waiting, and tonight the very flight he had chosen showed its cracks. He remembered the briefing clearly. The thefts always start small, something insignificant first, a missing item no one will suspect. Then, when attention drifts, the larger packages disappear. And now, a missing first-class meal. It wasn't about food. It was a signal, a diversion, something to shift blame, stir the passengers, and distract from whatever was happening behind the curtain of service trays and locked compartments. The attendant's sharp accusation wasn't just personal. It was dangerous. It put a spotlight on him, and in doing so, it risked shattering the cover he had built carefully, step by step. He could still hear her words echoing. "You don't look like you belong here." She didn't realize how right and wrong she was at the same time. He didn't belong in first class as a passenger. He belonged here as a hunter of truth, hidden in the most ordinary skin. But if she pushed too far, if she forced him to reveal himself too soon, the entire operation could collapse. The real thieves, the ones he came for, would scatter like shadows at dawn. His thoughts drifted further back, to the faces of victims whose valuables had vanished into thin air. A businessman whose heirloom watch disappeared mid-flight. A woman whose diplomatic documents never arrived. Families cheated, reputations destroyed, all while someone inside these flights grew rich off stolen trust. That was why he boarded this plane, wearing clothes that made him invisible. That was why he kept silent now, even as passengers sneered. Justice wasn't served by pride. Justice required patience. But patience was fragile, and every new whisper, every mocking laugh, every false word from the attendant pushed the moment closer to breaking. He let out a quiet breath, masking the storm inside him. His eyes flicked to the galley at the front where crew members moved quickly, exchanging glances they thought no one noticed. He did notice. Every detail, every hurried step, every nervous twitch. The missing meal was no accident. It was bait, and he had taken the seat closest to the hook. As the plane surged through the night sky, he sat perfectly still, but his mind moved like a blade, measuring every voice, every movement, every possible link in a chain of deceit. For the passengers, he was a suspect. For the attendant, he was a nuisance. But for the hidden network that thought they could outsmart the law, he was their worst nightmare, cloaked in silence. His fingers brushed the edge of his jacket pocket, where his secure phone rested, untouched. One call could change everything. But timing was everything. The storm had begun with a stolen meal. What came next could ground more than just this flight. And as he sat in the shadows of suspicion, one truth burned clear. He was here for justice, and no disguise, no accusation, would stop what was coming. The cabin had grown heavier with every passing minute. Whispers pressed down like weight on the man in plain clothes, yet he sat calm, his silence sharper than the accusations swirling around him. The attendant returned once more, her patience thinned to the edge. "Sir," she said, voice raised for all to hear, "you've given me no choice. When we land, I'll be reporting you to the airline. Theft, misconduct, deception. You will answer for it." The words drew a few approving nods from passengers, but others shifted uneasily. Something about the man's composure no longer matched the picture of a guilty thief. Still, appearances had already written his verdict in most minds. Finally, after holding his silence for so long, the man reached slowly into his jacket. The movement made the attendant tense, but he wasn't fumbling. He was deliberate, precise, as if every second mattered. He withdrew a small leather wallet, worn at the edges but polished with care. With a quiet click, he opened it. The glint of a badge caught the overhead light. A seal. An emblem of authority not easily mistaken. And beneath it, an identification card with words that froze the whispers mid-air. Federal Judge. Special Assignment. The cabin went silent. Gasps cut through the stillness like thunder. A woman covered her mouth. A man lowered his gaze, shame washing over him for the insults he'd whispered. The whispers of thief and fraud died instantly, replaced with wide eyes and pounding realization. The attendant stepped back, her confidence shaken. A judge? Her voice cracked slightly, but she quickly tried to steady it. Anyone can carry a badge. Anyone can— His voice interrupted, firm yet calm. These credentials are not toys, miss. They carry weight in every courtroom and every corner of this nation. You accused me of theft publicly without proof. Do you understand the seriousness of what you've just done? Passengers looked between them, the balance of power shifting before their eyes. The man in plain clothes was no ordinary traveller. He was authority cloaked in silence. But the attendant wasn't ready to concede. Her pride locked her into defiance. Straightening her shoulders, she snapped, "Judge or not, you are out of line. You don't belong in first class. You don't fit the profile. I will still report this to my airline. You'll answer to them." The arrogance in her words sent a murmur of disbelief through the cabin. How could she challenge someone who could decide the fate of lives with a gavel strike? The judge studied her for a long moment, his gaze calm but sharp. "You want to report me? Very well. But understand this. Your report will not go to your airline first. It will cross my desk. And when it does, you will have to answer for every word, every baseless accusation, every humiliation you've inflicted in front of witnesses." The colour drained slightly from her face, though she forced herself to hold her ground. "I was just doing my duty," she insisted. "Your duty," he said quietly, "is to serve with fairness and respect, not to judge by clothing, not to condemn without evidence." The words echoed through the cabin. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, reminded of the harsh things they had whispered. A few looked down, ashamed. Others sneaked glances of respect at the man who had endured humiliation with unshaken calm. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the engines filled the silence. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, one passenger muttered, "He warned her. He told her to be careful." The realization spread like a ripple. The man had never raised his voice. He had never threatened, only cautioned. And now, the truth stood in plain sight. He had been right all along. The attendant clutched her notepad tighter, forcing a brittle smile. "Fine. Show your badge. Intimidate if you must. But don't think this is over." She turned sharply and walked away, heels striking the floor harder than before, as if each step tried to reclaim dignity already lost. The judge leaned back, closing his wallet, tucking the badge away once more. To the casual eye, he was again just a man in plain clothes, but to every passenger who had witnessed the reveal, he would never look ordinary again. And though the confrontation seemed finished, the weight in the air said otherwise. Because one truth lingered in every mind. If a single badge could silence a cabin, what else was this man capable of? The answer would arrive sooner than anyone expected, carried on the wings of military jets already streaking through the night sky. The cabin still hummed with unease. Passengers avoided one another's eyes, haunted by the revelation they had just witnessed. The man they mocked was no thief, no pretender. He was a judge, calm, calculating, and far more powerful than anyone had imagined. Yet even as silence stretched, the attendant's pride refused to bend. Her words still lingered in the air, bitter and unrepentant. And the judge, seated in the dim glow of the reading light, finally made his decision. Without raising his voice, without any theatrical gesture, he reached once more into his jacket. This time he withdrew not a badge, but a small, sleek device, his secure line. Its matte surface reflected no light, built for discretion, not display. The cabin's hum softened, as if the atmosphere itself leaned closer. He pressed one button. A tone answered. Then a voice, steady, crisp, official. "Confirm identity." The judge responded with only a sequence of numbers, a code precise and memorized. "Confirmed," the voice replied. "Go ahead, sir." Every syllable carried weight. He leaned slightly forward, lowering his tone just enough for the nearest passengers to catch fragments. "This is Judge Whitaker. Assignment compromised. Authorization Delta 7. Initiate shadow protocol immediately." The words meant little to those who overheard, but the seriousness in his voice sent chills down spines. He ended the call just as quickly as it had begun. No threats, no explanations, just silence. At first, nothing seemed to change. The engines droned on. The plane cut smoothly through the night sky. Some passengers whispered, wondering if the call had even mattered. But then, a faint vibration passed through the fuselage. Someone near the window gasped. "Wait, what is that?" Heads turned, curtains pulled back, and there, gliding against the darkness, a shape appeared. A jet, sleek, predatory, riding the same air currents as their plane. Gasps erupted across the cabin. Then another jet appeared on the opposite side, lights blinking coldly in the night. Twin guardians, or threats, now flanked the commercial flight. The captain's voice cracked over the intercom, tension barely masked. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm. We have just been informed that our aircraft is being shadowed by military escorts. We've been instructed to maintain course and speed. There is no immediate danger." But the words did nothing to still the panic. Passengers clutched armrests, some whispering prayers, others demanding answers.
"Why are they here? What's happening? Are we in danger?"
The attendant, pale now, hurried down the aisle, her earlier arrogance melting into fear. She approached the judge, her voice shaking despite her attempt at composure. "What did you do? Why are there fighter jets outside our plane?" The judge looked up at her, steady and unshaken. "I made one call. That's all it took. A call you forced me to make when you pushed too far." Her lips parted, but no words came. She could only glance toward the windows, where the sharp silhouettes of military wings cut through the clouds. The murmurs around them grew louder. "It's him," one man whispered. "He called them." "No," another protested, though his voice trembled. "No passenger has that kind of power." But the truth was plain. They had seen the badge, they had heard the code, and now they were living the consequence. The captain's voice returned, more urgent. "Cabin crew, secure the aisles. We are maintaining communication with the escorts. All passengers remain seated." The flight attendant finally whispered, barely audible, This could become an international incident." The judge's eyes met hers, calm but resolute. "It already is." For the first time, her arrogance gave way to terror. She realized the weight of what she had done, turning a false accusation into a chain of events now visible at 30,000 feet. Every passenger now understood. This was no longer just a flight. This was a stage where nations watched from the shadows, and in the center of it all sat the man they had doubted, the judge whose calm voice had summoned wings of war. But even as fear rippled throughout, the cabin. He leaned back in his seat, as if everything was unfolding exactly as he had foreseen. Because the truth was, this mission had never been about a missing meal. The real storm was only beginning to break. And when the next moment arrived, the entire plane would learn just how deep the judge's authority truly ran. The sight of military jets riding the wings of a passenger plane was enough to silence even the boldest voices. Every passenger sat frozen, breaths shallow, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the true storm was still inside the cabin. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time more brittle, more urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed to cooperate fully with federal orders. Remain calm. This situation will be resolved." But the captain's words were not meant for the passengers. They were meant for the crew. the very crew now shifting uncomfortably under the gaze of the judge. The man who had sat quietly, mocked for his plain clothes, now carried an authority that seemed to bend even the walls of the aircraft. He didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. But when he spoke, it cut through the cabin like steel. "Captain, lock down the galley. No one enters. No one leaves." The captain hesitated. "Sir, this is highly irregular." The judge turned his eyes toward him, steady, unflinching. "So is flying with fighter jets circling your wings. Do it." The order was obeyed. The galley doors sealed, carts rolled into place, attendants exchanging nervous glances. For the first time, doubt flickered among them. Whispers rippled through the passengers. "What's going on? Why the galley?" one woman murmured. Another leaned closer. "Don't you see? This isn't about a meal." The judge leaned back, but his eyes scanned the crew, studying each face, each nervous twitch. Then his words fell heavy. "For weeks, shipments have gone missing. High-value items, jewelry, electronics, medicine, smuggled through flights just like this one. Tonight, I boarded not as a judge, but as a man in disguise, to see where the chain breaks." Gasps swept across the cabin. Some passengers pressed hands to their mouths. Others exchanged uneasy looks. And then the weight of his meaning sank in. The stolen first-class meal? It wasn't just arrogance. It was bait. The judge's gaze shifted to the attendant who had accused him. She stood frozen, pale, her hands clenched tight at her sides. "Tell them," he said quietly. Her lips trembled. I don't know what you're talking about." His tone sharpened, a blade cloaked in calm. "Then why were you so quick to single me out? Why insist on a theft that didn't exist, unless you needed a distraction from something else?" The cabin fell silent, every eye fixed on her. "Check the storage compartments," the judge instructed. Two attendants, reluctant but obedient, opened the galley bins. The sound of metal latches clicking echoed louder than thunder in that moment. And then, gasps. Hidden beneath trays of untouched meals were small sealed packages. Not food, not supplies, something else entirely. One passenger near the aisle blurted out, That's not airline cargo." The judge's voice remained calm, but the weight behind it grew heavier. "Contraband. Smuggled under your very noses. The missing meals weren't lost. They were swapped to cover these shipments." The captain stared, stunned. "All this time? On my aircraft?" The attendant who had accused him shook her head violently, panic flooding her face. "No, I didn't. This isn't mine. I was just—" But the words tumbled uselessly. The passengers who once whispered in judgment now stared with disgust, their earlier mockery turning into shame. "You accused a man to hide your own operation," one passenger spat. "You tried to humiliate him, and now look." The attendant's breath came fast, desperate. "I didn't know who he was. I didn't—" The judge's eyes softened, though his voice held its authority. "That's the mistake. It was never about knowing who I was. It was about doing what was right. And you failed." Silence crushed the cabin again. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade under the weight of his words. The captain finally straightened, his voice grim. "We'll notify ground immediately. The authorities will meet us upon landing." The judge nodded once. "Good. This plane lands under federal order now." For the attendant, the humiliation was complete. Once so sure of herself, she now stood in the center of the cabin, exposed, every eye upon her. The respect she demanded was gone, replaced with scorn, regret, and disbelief. But for the passengers, a deeper truth settled in. This flight was never about one man sitting where he didn't belong. It was about uncovering corruption hidden in plain sight. And at 30,000 feet, with fighter jets on their wings, there was no escaping justice. Yet even as order returned, the cabin still pulsed with unease, because everyone knew the discovery was only the beginning. And when the plane finally touched down, the world outside would be waiting. The cabin was still. Passengers sat rigid, eyes darting between the sealed galley and the man they had once mocked. Outside, fighter jets held their formation, silent guardians in the twilight sky. Inside, the air pulsed with shame, fear, and anticipation. The judge rose slowly from his seat. He didn't need to raise his voice. Authority lived in the weight of his presence, in the calm certainty of each word. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, scanning the cabin, "tonight you witnessed how quickly truth is clouded by appearances. A man in plain clothes was judged guilty before a single fact was proven, and all it took was one false accusation." Murmurs rippled through the passengers. Some lowered their eyes, unable to meet his gaze. Others shifted uneasily, replaying their own whispers, their own assumptions. He continued, his voice steady, almost solemn. "You saw a man who did not look like he belonged here, and you doubted him because his jacket was simple, because his shoes were worn. You believed a lie because it fit your prejudice." Gasps of recognition swept across the rows. A few passengers muttered apologies under their breath, though none dared speak them aloud. The flight attendant who had accused him stood trembling near the aisle, flanked now by two members of the crew who had reluctantly stepped forward to escort her. She shook her head in denial, but her eyes betrayed the truth. The judge turned toward her, his expression neither cruel nor triumphant, only resolute. "You carried authority, but you used it to deceive. You carried responsibility, but you used it to shield corruption. You thought my silence meant weakness. It meant patience." The cabin fell into absolute silence. Even the hum of the engine seemed to retreat behind his words. He gestured lightly toward the hidden contraband still stacked in the galley compartments. These crimes were not uncovered by chance. They were revealed because corruption always overreaches. Tonight it reached too far. The attendant broke then, sobbing, pleading with the captain. "Please, please, I didn't know what was in those packages. I was told it was just—" But the captain shook his head firmly. "Save it for the ground. You'll have your chance to explain." The crew led her away, her once sharp, commanding tone reduced to broken protests. Passengers who had earlier laughed at the stranger now avoided her gaze, ashamed of the part they had played in her rise. The judge looked back over the cabin. His next words carried not judgment, but warning. "Remember this moment, because justice doesn't always wear robes. It doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it sits quietly, in the very seat you dismiss." The message landed hard. Men and women who once whispered with scorn now nodded with respect, some even bowing their heads as if in silent apology. Then, almost as if the sky itself acknowledged the moment, the military jets outside began to shift formation. With precision they banked away, vanishing into the clouds. The threat had passed. The truth had restored order. Relief washed over the cabin, but it was not the same relief as before. It was deeper, heavier, shaped by the knowledge of their own mistakes. The judge sat back down, his composure unbroken. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His presence had already redrawn the meaning of authority for everyone on board. The intercom chimed once more, the captain's voice now firm with resolve. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Federal agents will meet us on the ground. Until then, remain seated. Justice is already on this plane." And as the plane descended, every passenger carried a lesson they would never forget. That dignity cannot be measured by clothing, nor truth by appearances. At 30,000 feet, above the clouds and the judgments of the world below, justice had spoken. The wheels hit the runway with a heavy thud, shaking every heart on board. Through the windows, passengers caught sight of flashing lights lining the tarmac, police cruisers, black SUVs, and cameras poised behind barricades. This was no ordinary landing. The cabin remained hushed. No one dared whisper. The weight of what had just unfolded still clung to the air. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came over the intercom, steadier now. "Welcome to your destination. For your safety, please remain seated. Authorities will be boarding shortly." A ripple of unease passed through the rows, but all eyes drifted toward the man in plain clothes, the man they once dismissed, now revealed as the hand of justice itself. He didn't rise immediately. He simply closed the secure phone he had used, slipped it back into his coat, and waited. His calmness in the chaos was the final reminder. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Moments later, Federal agents entered the plane, their presence sharp, their purpose clear. The disgraced flight attendant was led away in silence, her eyes red, her posture broken. The same passengers who once nodded with her now refused to meet her gaze. Then the judge stood. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped into the aisle. Passengers leaned back, some in respect, some in awe. A few whispered apologies, voices trembling. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His lesson had already been delivered. As he walked toward the exit, the cabin doors opened. The blinding flash of cameras met him, journalists shouting questions, recording the man who had turned an ordinary flight into a stage for truth. But he didn't bask in the attention. He simply showed his credentials to the waiting officials and nodded. One agent said firmly, "Sir, the operation was a success. The smuggling ring will unravel from here." The judge replied softly, "It began unraveling the moment arrogance mistook patience for weakness." Outside, the military jets roared overhead one last time before breaking formation, peeling into the horizon. The sky was clear again. Passengers slowly began to disembark, each carrying more than their luggage. They carried a memory of how quickly judgment had clouded their eyes, and how justice had cut through it like light through a storm. The story of the stolen meal would not end as gossip whispered between rows. It would live as a lesson, told and retold, that humility matters more than appearances, respect matters more than rank, and justice, though sometimes delayed, always finds its way. At 30,000 feet, they had witnessed a truth that the world below often forgets. And as the judge disappeared into the waiting cars, the passengers knew they hadn't just landed from a flight. They had landed with lessons